All right, we are recording. Annette, you may kick us off.
So I want to call to order the Planning Commission meeting for Tuesday, July 7th, 2020. This meeting will be held remotely by telephone and Zoom video conferencing pursuant to the Governor's Stay Home, Stay Healthy Proclamation number 20-25 as amended. Do you want me to read the rest of it or just, is that good?
No, that's enough.
Okay. So it's actually 6:11 and we'll call the meeting to order and do the Pledge of Allegiance. Somebody else want to do it tonight? Okay, I'll do it. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. So number 2 is audience comments, not on the agenda. Do we have audience?
No, but I will introduce our intern, Josie, who is here tonight. She's going to help us present one of the later items on the agenda. So she's not a member of the public for tonight's meeting.
Okay. Hi, Josie. So number 3, approval of the minutes from June 2nd. Can we do that without a quorum?
No, we will have to wait on the minutes.
Okay. So the first business item then is a discussion of ADU code revisions.
Carrie, do you want to take this one or do you want me to?
I can discuss it. That's fine.
All right, I'll share it real quick on the screen. All right, take it away.
The revisions that are before you were brought up by Councilmember Fred Chang a couple of months ago. I think that he is considering building an ADU in his property, and he's been reviewing our existing ADU code, and he had some concerns, not just for himself, but in general about things in the ADU code that might make it a little difficult for someone to build an ADU on their property, specifically a detached ADU. And there were some questions in there also that he had about, well, what does this really mean? This isn't really clear. So he asked us to kind of make a few things in here just more clear, and also change a couple of things in here that he thought were a little bit overly restrictive. And so we looked through the code and we discussed these issues with Public Works, Finance, and the city attorney, and agreed, yeah, there are some things in here that while we understand where these came from, you know, trying to protect neighbors from undue impact from having ADUs on an adjacent property, they probably maybe are a little bit restrictive, a little too stringent, and some of these can be modified somewhat and still allow an ADU to exist, make it a little bit more easy to build one and still protect adjacent property owners from undue impacts. So I'll just go through those kind of quickly for you. So these are in red line.
Carrie, what does ADU mean? What does it
I'm so sorry. Accessory dwelling units.
Okay, thanks.
Sorry.
That's all right.
So we have these in a section of our code. We have one section devoted to it, Chapter 2068, accessory dwelling units. And do I have control of the screen, Nick?
No, I do.
You do.
You want me to scroll?
Okay, no, that's okay. I just wondered. So what one of the things that Fred had expressed concern about was that if you look down on the first page under 2068-100 general requirements, where Nick is highlighting it, he was concerned that the way that we had phrased the requirement for an owner to have, you have to reside in the main unit, the primary unit of either the primary house or the ADU. The owner of the property must live in one or the other for 6 months of the year, at least 6 months of the year, and can't charge rent for both units at any one time. And so he was a little concerned that this language might make people think, well, what if I have a roommate? You know, or what if I want to just rent out a room in my house? What if I want to do Airbnb and rent out a room? This sounds to me like that would prevent me from doing that. And that was not the intention of it. You can collect rent from a roommate for a room in your house or for a house share while you are renting out your ADU, the entire ADU, to someone else. So we wanted to clarify that. We wanted to make it clear that nothing prevents you from having a roommate or an Airbnb in your house. We never meant to prohibit that from happening. So what this clarifying language here is meant to just make sure that everybody understands that. So nothing has really changed here in intent. It's just clarifying. And then Nick, there's nothing further down on that page, right? I can't see it. No, okay. So going up to page 2.
Are you seeing this on a split screen, like a dual screen, or are you only seeing a single page?
I'm seeing 2 pages at once.
Okay, perfect. So yeah, that's
Okay.
the only thing on that first page.
Okay. And another thing that he had said was, and this is on section 9, which is struck out, red line, under utilities. A concern that Fred had was, well, this makes it really difficult if we say that an ADU must be connected to the utilities of the main residence. That's a lot of work for someone who has an ADU. You've got to be always paying the bills for your renter in your ADU. How do you split that electricity equally? How do you know that they use this much water, you use that much electricity, and so forth? It's a pain. Why does it have to be like this? And originally we put that in there because we really did not want a house to become a duplex. We didn't want this to appear that you would have, especially within one single house, that you were splitting a unit inside to become a duplex, or that you were having 2 houses on one property, each with separate meters. And so then breaking down that appearance of a single family residential neighborhood. However, we do now have design guidelines that address how single family houses are to be oriented to the street, how you have your doors face the street, how your ADU must be subservient or subordinate to that main entry. Other things which are intended to not have the ADU overshadow or kind of have their appearance seem to be out of proportion to the impact of its location on the property. So it does seem like that might have been a little bit too stringent and maybe unnecessary. And the hassle of having to deal with utilities and paying the bills for your renters may be discouraging some people from doing this. So we decided that would be reasonable to take that out of the ADU code. Okay, on page 3, Fred had asked about this too, and I think that what we had here is actually something that we didn't really intend to do at all. We had said originally for lot coverage that I'm sorry, I'm thinking of the one below that. He had asked how we calculated lot coverage. Stay still, Nick. The calculation of maximum lot coverage must include all of the buildings on the lot or the site. So that includes the main house, the ADU, if that's detached. It includes your accessory buildings. So if you have a detached garage, a shed, anything like that, you're looking at all of the buildings on the property when you're looking at maximum lot coverage for your zone. If you are looking at building an ADU, it is going to have to comply with the zone requirements for setbacks and lot coverage, just like building the regular primary structure. And for the accessory building type, whether that's in a backyard cottage type ADU, or whether it's in addition to your house, that's going to have to comply with those setback requirements. And that just wasn't specified. It wasn't called out here. So we wanted to make that a little bit more clear. And then down on number 10, Fred questioned why we had that in here. And honestly, I am not sure why we had that in here, because what this said was that the ADU, if you had a detached ADU, that could be the only accessory building on the parcel. And that did seem extremely restrictive. That means you couldn't have a tool shed, basically. You couldn't have a greenhouse. you couldn't have anything other than your house and the ADU, no accessory buildings whatsoever. And so that did seem extremely restrictive. You could potentially have something under 200 square feet, but anything that was 200 square feet or over, it simply wasn't allowed. And that doesn't seem like what we really wanted to be restricting people for. There didn't seem to be a really good reason for that, especially for people with larger lots. That's unnecessarily discouraging ADU development. And so we've removed that from the code as well. And so we put this together, we ran it by Councilmember Chang. I believe this satisfied all of his concerns. And so we wanted to just bring this forward to the Planning Commission and see what you thought of these proposed changes. And if there was anything else that you might think of while we're reviewing the ADU code that you also think would be helpful or useful to make changes to at this time.
And I'll just add to that the plan right now would be to take this forward for a public hearing at your August meeting on, I believe that's August 7th, 6th?
4th.
4th, close.
Well, in number 10 there, don't we have a restriction right now that you would need a building permit, anything over 200 square feet?
Yes.
Yes, that is correct.
Okay, so that seems like that kind of covers you there for an outbuilding or a shed, storage shed, tool shed, or anything like that. So I don't know why that would be, excuse me, I don't know why that would be taken out. Am I missing something here?
Well, so if you have an existing detached garage on your property and you also want to build an accessory dwelling unit, you would have to build it on top of your garage or tear your garage down in order to build the ADU, rather than being able to build a second building next to your garage.
Okay.
So this prohibits two accessory buildings on the same lot.
And I really am not sure why we did that, because right now, if you have a single family house, you can have as many accessory buildings as you want. It's just we wrote this so you couldn't have an ADU in any other accessory buildings.
Okay.
Yeah.
Is there a limit to only one ADU?
Yes, there is.
Is that stated in here somewhere?
That's actually in the, well, for a detached ADU, there's a limit of one backyard cottage per lot. I don't know if it states that there's a limit for an attached ADU. Carrie, do you? I mean, you can only use, your ADU can only be a certain percentage of your overall square footage. And so your ADU, if you have two of them, it's going to exceed that square footage threshold. Unless you have a really big house.
Or a really big lot?
Is it the square?
I am about 99% sure you can only have one ADU on one lot with one house in a single family neighborhood, but I would have to look at the code for that.
I think it's probably something just to check and make sure, so that we don't have somebody building 2, 3 of them.
No, you cannot do that. You can't have like 2 or 3 ADUs associated with one house. No.
Okay, but it's somewhere codified.
That's what I'm trying to look up right now.
Has anybody done this yet?
Yes. Yes, so you can only have one detached ADU per lot. That's in 20.32, 030. For the attached ADUs, that's a different code section. I have to go there. And yes, Annette, we have had a few of these built. We had one built recently above a garage within the last 18 months or so.
Nice.
We have a few of them that are in like a finished basement where they've created a separate entry and they've put a kitchen down there and are able to rent it out.
But not one yet that's been detached from the house?
No, the one that was above the garage was a detached garage with an apartment above it.
Oh, okay. And then I have a question about number 11, just because I can't figure it out. So when they're talking about a separate exterior entrance, pedestrian walkway shall be provided between the ADU and the nearest sidewalk, or where no sidewalk exists, the nearest street right of way. Is that like if if I had one in my backyard, I would just have a sidewalk to my driveway, which is attached to the street. Is that what that means?
You would have to put a footpath from the ADU to the street. So it,
So could I hook it up to my existing walkway?
if it's a pedestrian walkway, yes.
Okay,
I think it says it has to be composed of materials that are distinct from any adjacent driving surface. So if you have a sidewalk that is separated by landscaping from your driveway, that's like a walking path, then that would be acceptable.
okay, thanks.
So I'm still looking for the attached ADU provision, but are there any other questions while I'm looking for that?
I thought that it all looked pretty good myself, the changes.
Yeah, I agree. Just so we know we're limited to just the one.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't see a limit for an attached ADU, only a detached ADU. There, you can only have one detached ADU. But if you want to put 2 apartments in your basement, there's nothing that restricts you except for the I'm looking for it here. There's a provision, I think under section 110 here. Height, location, setbacks, design. Carrie, isn't there something that talks about like the ADU can't be more than 40% of the square footage of the house?
Number 3, size.
Oh, there we go. Yeah. So the
And I think it's clear throughout the code, it's talking about the ADU. It's
that's
not
true.
one or more ADUs or the ADUs. It's the ADU and the primary unit and the ADU.
Right. And so the primary, you have to establish which unit is the primary in order to then establish an accessory unit. And so you can't, the primary unit is going to have to be 60% of the overall square footage, and the ADU can be 40%. So I suppose if you had the room, it's theoretically possible to argue that, but I think we would probably make an interpretation of our code that says it's the ADU is a singular ADU, like what Carrie was saying.
Okay. But that's the detached. If they had that basement with two ADUs in the basement, one up in the second floor, and then they decided to do an accessory building. They could have 3 internals and 1 external. I'm just taking it to an extreme, for example.
Yeah, I mean, if we need to, we can add a provision here that clearly says that that there's only 1 ADU per lot. I mean, it's not hard to add that to this chapter.
And is that something we want? I mean, does it really matter?
You know, honestly, I think Seattle now allows up to 2 ADUs per lot as a maximum, but we haven't traveled down that road yet.
So we're limiting to 1 external ADU, correct?
Correct.
So yeah, I tend to agree. It might be a good idea to look at some sort of overall limit, so you don't have that worst case scenario where a large home gets turned into an apartment complex, essentially.
Sure. Yeah, that's easy to add. We'll have Carrie insert that before we bring it back to you in August.
Otherwise, it looks fine to me.
Yeah, I'm good with it.
Right. Any final questions or concerns? All right, Annette, are you ready to move on to the next item?
Hey, next item, business item 4B, discussion for the Ruby Creek sub-area plan.
All right, for this item, I'm going to share, we put together a little presentation, and as I mentioned, our intern Josie is here tonight, and she has been working on this pretty extensively with us for the last 6 months. Josie is at Western Washington University and lives in Tacoma, but has been coming into Port Orchard once a week, and now over the summer is working quite a bit more. I'm just looking for the right document to share. Just bear with me here. All right, there we go. So tonight we have a presentation on the Ruby Creek sub-area plan, and I wanted to sort of walk you through what is in the plan and what our process has been up to this point. Our path going forward, our hope is that we can hold a public hearing on August 4th to take public testimony on the draft plan, and if there are changes asked for by the public, we can evaluate those, and if there are no changes, our ask would be that we recommend this for approval so that the City Council can take action to adopt the plan. The area, the Ruby Creek area, is the intersection of Sydney and Sedgwick, out by Albertsons, near the Sedgwick and SR 16 interchange. And the way that we kicked off this project, if you remember, in our 2016 comprehensive plan, we took the centers approach to planning. We wanted to create all of these distinct little centers throughout the city and encourage growth to go into those centers to create vibrant neighborhoods. And this is the first of many sub-area plans that we are going to be preparing. We are also preparing a plan right now for our downtown and the county campus area. And so that's a separate project that you'll be hearing more about in the near future. But this is a nice, a small area that's fairly manageable from a planning standpoint for us to do this project internally. We did hire some consultants to help us with the initial site plan and the 3D renderings. And then we brought Josie on to help us with some other graphic design type work to really illustrate what we hope to accomplish here. So when we started this project, we hired Makers Architecture out of Seattle. They're also the company that did our city's design guidelines. And we started looking at what the alternative patterns of development could be in this area. And you can kind of see here, I know this is a CAD drawing and there's not a lot of color, but you have Ruby Creek running right through the middle of the center in an east-west direction. And you have, and I apologize, my dogs are getting restless here, so hopefully they're not disturbing you. The Blackjack Creek corridor runs north-south and crosses under SR 16 right at the Sedgwick interchange. And so those two creeks really create some pretty significant barriers to making connections through the center. And so we worked with the consultant to come up with 3 alternatives for development. The first alternative was just simply to focus on developing a Main Street vibe for the Sydney Road corridor. And the second alternative, Kitsap Transit has been studying the possibility of building a new park and ride facility. And that park and ride facility, they wanted to put right in the middle of the center here. And they've been studying that now for about a year, and they've decided that this is their second choice site out of all the sites that they've considered. And so in the preferred alternative that we've selected, we have a park and ride alternative, but it still preserves this Main Street feel for the Sydney corridor. And you'll see some imagery illustrating that. The third alternative we looked at was, we looked at 2 possibilities. One was taking the Lowe's stoplight down here in the corner, the lower right corner, and actually building a bridge across Blackjack Creek to create an additional road connection through the corridor. And then we also studied just making an additional north-south road that would be parallel to Sydney to really improve the connectivity in the area and make it walkable. But once we dug a little bit deeper into the critical area constraints, the floodplains, it really became apparent that that was going to be cost prohibitive. I think the bridge project alone is probably a $20 million road project, and we have so many road needs that it didn't seem like a prudent use of city resources to pursue that. So we had initially selected the first alternative, which was the Main Street alternative without the park and ride. Kitsap Transit came back and talked to us a little bit more and said, we'd really like to look at the possibility of a park and ride in the center. And so we've come up with kind of a hybrid preferred alternative. So that's an overview of the background. Oh, and I guess the other piece of this, we sent out mailers to all of the residents within the sub area boundary and asked them to participate in a survey back in November, or I guess it was December and January. And then we had planned to have some open houses and actually get the rec room at one of the apartment complexes and actually try to meet with some of the residents, but the coronavirus pandemic derailed our plans for that. And so we're instead going to focus on just hosting public hearings and trying to listen to people as best we can while practicing social distancing. And so we're going to send out mailers to everyone again and let them know of the public hearing in August. And hopefully we will get some positive feedback on the plans that we've come up with in the absence of being able to do outreach through those workshops that we had hoped to conduct.
So, quick question. You said that was the second choice for the park and ride. What was the first choice?
The first choice was just to do a main street and to have, you see here, there's some apartment buildings planned on the back half of this main property in the middle. And so it's really a more residentially focused alternative that still provides the commercial main street kind of spine of the neighborhood, but provides more units of housing.
So when you talked about those two different creeks or whatever, are they going to be covered up or are they going to be open?
Oh, they have to be open. They're habitat for salmon, and you'll hear more about it as we walk through the presentation here.
Okay,
so I'm going to let Josie. We've broken the area into a north, central, and then this south end down by the main intersection here. And so the plan really tackles these three distinct areas, which are bisected by the creek in the middle, and then Sedgwick is sort of a barrier on the south end. And I'm going to let Josie give you an overview of the central Ruby Creek area, which is intended to be the heart of the neighborhood.
Hi, so for this figure, and also again, the figure numbers are relating to the document. They're not in order in this presentation, but they are referring to the figure numbers as they are in the document. So for this figure here, this is just an illustration showing the site plan of the central area. So the center of the new proposed neighborhood is about halfway between Ruby Creek and Sedgwick Road, and will be marked by a new intersection that connects the main street, which is Sydney, and the property is located behind the single-story shop fronts and the mixed-use buildings that are located directly on Sydney. And Sydney Road will have a reworked street design that will be pedestrian-oriented and walkable. Other amenities included in this street design are wide sidewalks, street trees, and on-street parking. Also making sure that the driveways that are coming off of Sydney are aligned to facilitate crossing for pedestrian-friendly streetscapes. And then as well as the center of the neighborhood is also in proximity to the park that you see. And that will help enhance the natural amenities that the two creeks, Blackjack and Ruby, provide, as well as the sewer lift station that's kind of up there, yep. And the need to put power lines underground throughout the center of the neighborhood, just to ensure that walkability. And then this is a nice rendering showing a more 3D version of what this could look like on the ground. The area has a mix of different building types and styles, such as mixed-use shop fronts, single-story shop fronts, and apartment buildings, creating plenty of opportunity around the neighborhood, such as housing, shopping, recreation, and entertainment. And then this figure shows the central and southern parts of the neighborhood and how block frontage would change on Sydney Road to accommodate the new neighborhood center. And this is articulated through the change in color from purple to red. The red is identified as storefront block frontage, whereas the purple is varied frontage. And the small yellow arrows that you see kind of in the center of the red articulate high visibility street corners, and that's just the center of the neighborhood.
Okay, so, and I wanted to add on to that, the storefront block frontage is where the code requires buildings to be built out to the sidewalk, whereas the varied block frontage is where the buildings can have a 10-foot landscaping setback or be storefronts. This is where we want to require that we create this sort of neighborhood feel where you can park on the street, there's wide sidewalks, you can walk to storefronts, and there's more of a traditional neighborhood feel created. So the next slide, after we had selected our preferred alternative and turned our consultant loose on producing those renderings, the Kitsap Transit came back and said they really would like to explore this site more. And so we sort of backtracked, but we didn't have the budget to actually update the renderings to show a second alternative. So you have to use your imagination a little bit more here. But they've identified those same two intersections, which I'm going to go back here. So if you see these crosswalks here and here, those correspond with these access points in the center of the neighborhood. And what they've done is they've preserved about 150 feet of building pad so that you can still build those mixed-use shopfront buildings along the street, but the park and ride would actually be tucked behind those facilities. And in talking to Kitsap Transit, they felt that the park and ride would also provide parking for a future neighborhood park here. And so right now, I believe that this is their second choice in terms of a preferred location for a park and ride facility, but they are moving on to the next step of their feasibility assessment and could be looking to acquire site number one or try to move forward with this plan. And so our plan accommodates this while still preserving the integrity of Sydney Road as a nice walkable area. When you go to the North Ruby Creek area, again, this is the Sydney Glen Elementary is just off the top of the page. Glenwood Road is a county rural road that goes through and connects to Sedgwick a little bit out by the Stetson Heights development. We already have a proposed development coming in on this eastern site. That is a apartment complex that they're talking about 230 apartment units, and it's kind of a nice garden apartment with amenities, a rec room, pool. I think a little bit nicer than what has previously been constructed in the area. And as far as the west side of the street, we haven't heard anything in the way of plans from these developers, but it is currently zoned to allow for mixed use development. So it could be commercial or apartments. We're sort of envisioning that the north end of the corridor is going to take a more residential feel. The commercial market was weak prior to coronavirus, and we think it's only getting weaker as people have learned to adapt and do more things online. And really, in order to support that central neighborhood core, you have to have a sufficient number of people living in walking distance, and you have to have good facilities for them to be able to walk into their neighborhood to actually get those services. And so this north end is really providing the bulk of the housing in the neighborhood in terms of residential units. This is the rendering. This is actually looking from the northwest to the southeast. You can see this is the intersection of Hovde Road. The main entrances to the apartments, again, they are aligned on the east and west so that you can create nice, safe pedestrian crossings that are striped. So that makes a total of 4 pedestrian crossings throughout the corridor. And I think the idea here is that it's really well landscaped. You have a lot of trees, street trees, and just make it feel like a nice neighborhood. And this is a map that's already in our plan. It shows that it's a varied street, so you can do storefronts along this section of the corridor. We just don't expect to see anyone go in that direction. And then in the north end of the corridor, it goes to a purely landscape setback, meaning that we only want landscaping. We don't want the buildings coming right out to the street. The south end of the Ruby Creek area, there's not much developable land here. There's just the one vacant pad and a whole lot of wetlands throughout this area. The Rush company did the apartment project here, the Sinclair, and they did wetland mitigation and actually created a lot of this wetland enhancement in between the two apartment complexes. And so this last site, they did bring the buildings out to the street. They were talking about doing like a live work type unit on the ground floor with apartments above, and then also providing a small little coffee shop type drive-through facility. And so this is just a rendering of the CAD drawings that they had provided, but it does show that you have some storefronts down here, a little plaza on the corner, and trying to just give this a little bit more of an urban feel compared to what's in that neighborhood now. And that really completes sort of the visuals of what we intend for the neighborhood to look like. And before I move on to the zoning and sort of how we implement this, does anyone have any questions or comments?
Are they going to widen Sydney, like up by Sydney Glen? Is all of that going to be widened?
It'll be widened in the sense that it will become a complete street with sidewalks and parking lanes and landscape strips, but it's not going to require 4 lanes of 4 travel lanes for vehicles. It's still a 2-lane road with a center. They'll add a center turn lane so that people wanting to turn in and out can get out of the flow of traffic. And it'll really just mostly be non-motorized bicycle lanes, bus stops, sidewalks.
So all the pictures that you've been showing us are a bit deceiving because it does show 2 lanes going each direction with additional parking lanes. But you're talking about east.
That's a bike lane here between the parking lane and the travel lane.
Okay.
And then you have a left turn lane here at the intersection. So the median gives way to a center turn lane.
Okay.
So this is our adopted road standard for a minor arterial, with the exception that the sidewalks are wider here because of the storefront designation.
So I have another question. If the majority of this is going to be apartments or living places for people to live, why do we need to have a park and ride there, for one? And won't that kind of look like what it looks like downtown on the waterfront, like just a bunch of cement? And I mean, if you're making something nice, why would we put a park and ride there?
Well, so when you look at the flow of traffic going to the shipyard and through Gorst, you already have a ton of people coming downtown, and the goal is really to intercept those people before they get to downtown. Right now, getting across SR16, that's a barrier in terms of traffic, and it adds significant time to somebody coming in from Mason County or Belfair. Anybody who's coming in from the west who wants to get to the shipyard, this sort of cuts off that traffic and intercepts it and puts it on transit to minimize traffic impacts. The other issue is that the new fast ferry is coming to Southworth, and they're also going to be having transit service connecting people from here out to Southworth, because the parking facility out there is limited as well, and you're adding a ton of traffic onto the state highway, and they hope that they can encourage people to get on at this location and take the bus the rest of the way and get onto the ferry. So it's a combination of things, but this really is the crossroads between where you can get to downtown or to Southworth, and that was the idea.
So one of the concern that I have, Nick, is the actual Highway 160 access, Sedgwick Road. You're gonna, even with the concept of putting people on Kitsap Transit, you're gonna increase the amount of traffic flow there in a already choke point. We've got Stetson Heights coming into that area as well. Are there plans to try to push, prod, do whatever we need to do to get the state to do something there at Sedgwick?
Well, yes, and actually so from Sydney to SR16 is a city road, and we have plans to widen that road to 4 lanes between Sydney and the highway. So that's already in the city's transportation plan, and it's referenced in this neighborhood plan, but it's not a new project as a result of this plan. As far as the state, eventually they're going to have to do something with the bridge across 16, and we have been lobbying. And actually, there was in the capital budget 2 years ago, we successfully got onto a project list to spend $7 million to redo the overpass at SR16, but the legislature ended up not passing a capital budget at all, and so it didn't make it through at that time. But we are hopeful that it will make it through again in the future, and it's still a top legislative priority for the council in terms of what we are asking the legislature to prioritize.
Okay.
So there's definitely plans to increase the east-west throughput just east, or just a little bit east of the neighborhood here, and that should totally accommodate the traffic associated with this development, with Stetson Heights, with McCormick Woods, with everything that's happening in the area. Going to 4 lanes there will fix that problem. But ultimately, that's probably going to get worse before it gets better, because it's a long time to design the project and to actually get it built.
Right.
Now we got 2 questions. So where Sydney goes into Sedgwick, it's basically 4 lanes, 5 lanes with a turn lane on all 4 corners of that intersection. So then it goes just north of where you've got the current apartment buildings. It goes from the 4 lanes down to 2 lanes, all the way to 16, where it turns into Pottery and goes back to 4 lanes.
Correct.
We're going to have that kind of hourglass shape to the Sydney and Pottery run.
So actually, the corridor, the road from Sedgwick all the way to Tremont is going to be it's the same section that you'll see the road section here in a minute, but it's going to be 2 lanes with center turn lane with intermittent medians, sidewalks, bike lanes. But that will never be a continuous 4-lane corridor. There just simply isn't the north-south traffic volume to warrant it. And really, the only reason that small stretch has 4 lanes now is because of the school. And I don't believe that they line their buses up on the street anymore, which is why those lanes were put in the first place, if I remember correctly.
Well, and we're restricted by the Highway 16 overpass there on Sydney as well, I believe.
Correct, but there is enough room under that bridge to put in pedestrian facilities and bike lanes. And you wouldn't need a center turn lane under the overpass. So
Right.
you would slim it down under the bridge to a 2-lane road, and then it would open up again on the north side.
And the second question is, what kind of time frame are you looking at on this?
It's difficult to say. I would, just in terms of the interest in developing, this is probably one of the highest interest locations in the city. I would say there are more people kicking the tires on purchasing projects and looking at development in this area than they are on the Bethel corridor. So, but ultimately, to build out all of these properties, you're probably looking at a minimum of 20 years. But our comp plan is a 20-year plan, and so this lays the foundation for what infrastructure is needed to support the full build out of the neighborhood, and really shows how many people and how many jobs can this portion of the city accommodate. Because every time we write our comprehensive plan, we're given a population and an employment figure that we have to plan for. And so we can say right off the top, this Ruby Creek area can accommodate 1,600 total residents and 600 total jobs, give or take. So and then we say we'll have to look at the other parts of the city to make sure that the other parts of the city have adequate infrastructure, but we have a sort of a known capacity in this area.
Okay. And then the other question I had was thinking about that timeline and the development here in conjunction with the Sedgwick Bethel street upgrades and development. Are they going to overlap at all?
It's hard to say. The Bethel Sedgwick, interestingly, I'm going to go, I guess this is a bit of a tangent, but we did just submit a grant application under the federal build program. And they say usually it takes a couple of tries to get funding under this program, because usually you'll get feedback and you'll say, well, you could have done this better, or we need this information. So we would love to get money in this first go around, but it may take a couple of tries to see if this is competitive and if it's worth pursuing again in the future, if we can make some additional changes or do some additional work on it. But our hope is, there is talk in Washington, D.C. of a stimulus package that would include infrastructure funding. And a lot of times when they pass those sorts of infrastructure bills, they say, well, we previously allocated, $200 million to this program, but if we quadrupled that funding, could we fund all of the projects that were applied for? And so our hope is that just by having an application in, sooner or later, an infrastructure bill is going to come along and we will get money. And so we did apply for that first phase. I think we applied for $11 million or so to start the Bethel project. And I think we hear back on that in September or October.
I can just imagine that if you're doing the Ruby Creek project, and it's well underway. And you also do the Bethel Sedgwick road improvement projects that it's just going to be bedlam.
It's better to do it sooner than later. It's only going to get worse as more development continues to happen.
Yes.
And it's a good thing that Tremont has done, because that provides an alternate route that does have capacity to accommodate that east-west traffic.
Yeah.
So anyway, I'm going to move on to the next section.
Nick,
So-
Nick, can I get two quick questions in?
Sure.
First off, did Kitsap Transit with the park and ride, did they look anywhere west of Sydney
Yes.
for the park and ride build?
Yes, they had they went through a process. They probably looked at 1,000 properties, and they've narrowed it down. They had criteria. They had to do, once they narrowed it down to 20 or 30, they had to look at soils and other issues, because while it may be a surface parking lot today, it could be a parking structure in the future. And so they go through a really technical evaluation of sites to see what meets their criteria. And then some things get disqualified for wetlands. But one of the key pieces is they don't want to be more than a half mile from an on-ramp to 16.
Right.
So that's one of the criteria. So they start with this bubble around the on-ramps, and then they look at how long is it actually going to take their driver to get from the highway to the park and ride facility and back. And some sites are better than others. They look at soils, they look at wetlands. I mean, there's a whole process that they use to narrow things down.
Well, my reason for asking is that east side of Sydney there is such a lowland, wetland area versus the west side seems to be a much higher piece of ground. Be a lot less issues with flooding with all that much new asphalt put in there. That was just a concern I had. My second question was, you guys had mentioned that you'd sent out information to the community, local community down there. What kind of feedback were you getting back from them?
Not much. It's interesting. They say that actually when coronavirus hit, some people saw participation increase. But when you look at who lives here now and the number of property owners in the area, you have probably 10 or 12 large landowners, and a few of those might have a house on a big lot. And then you have 400 or so residents living in apartments. And I think what we find is that a lot of the apartment residents are actually from somewhere else, and they aren't as connected to the community or engaged, or maybe they don't see themselves being here as long in terms of caring about what things are going to be like in 20 years. And so I think we only got 3 survey responses from the whole thing, but we sent direct mailers. We had email. We contacted the apartment managers and had emails. We tried to they pushed things out for us. And we just didn't get responses in the way that we would have hoped. And I think 2 of the responses were from large landowners, and 1 of them was from an apartment resident, if I remember correctly. So even if the feedback that we received is helpful, there's not enough statistical significance of the response to actually say, yes, this is what the community wants, or no, this is what the community, this isn't what the community wants.
Right.
We just went forward and said, let's put together a plan using our expertise and see what the community thinks of it.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. So other figures that are in the draft plan, we have a land use map and a zoning map. And remember, the land use is a high level kind of umbrella. And so most of this center is designated as commercial, but then within the commercial zone, there are 5 or 6 different, or within the commercial designation, there are 5 or 6 different commercial zones that can apply. And so we don't usually put our zoning in the comprehensive plan, but when we do a sub-area plan, I think it's important to do that because it makes it harder to change. And so we have prepared a zoning map that shows most of the center as being commercial mixed use. This orange along the road is actually our downtown mixed use, which is the same zoning we have in downtown Port Orchard. And the big difference there is when you do commercial mixed use, 50% of your frontage has to be occupied by a building. And when you do downtown mixed use, it has to be at 80%. And so we're really trying to make people bring the buildings out to the street and really activate the street with storefronts. The area off of the main corridor then is more flexible and allows for apartments or even like more strip mall development similar to the shopping center that you have on the northwest corner of Sydney and Sedgwick with the sushi and the Subway and Burger King and all of those things. Obviously, the church and the school are civic and institutional. The Little League fields remain park and recreation. The stream corridors are zoned greenbelt because they're not developable at any significant level of intensity. And then we do have some commercial heavy for the car dealership, the Albertsons, and then the existing, I think it's a Chevron gas station there on the corner. So the zoning is, the existing zoning code that we have is very suitable for implementing the renderings and the concepts that we've shown you. It's just a matter of putting it on the map in the right place to help achieve that vision. We did quite a bit of analysis in determining how much capacity is actually in the center for development. We identified vacant, underutilized, and developed land. And we did this exercise using GIS, and you'll notice that we lettered all of the properties, and these letters correspond to common ownership. So all the parcels in property A, I think there's 6 parcels in total. They're all under one owner and would be likely to develop together. And so we looked at each of these as a little planning area to try to figure out, how is this likely to develop? And is it residential? Is it commercial? Is it a mix of both? And then what do we see as the actual capacity? And so the table that's in here was used to create some numbers. I don't want to get into the details of the table so much as to focus on what the actual employment and population capacity is. In terms of the street, there's 3 road section drawings, and this is the main central core area of the neighborhood. And so this is where you can see there's the center turn lane or median. And so where there's an intersection, this is a turn lane. Where there's no intersection, it's a median. Then you get the travel lane, the bike lane, and then parallel parking, and then a 12-foot sidewalk. And then you would do tree grates or planters or some other type of landscaping spaced on center. But generally the sidewalk is 12 feet wide, except where there's some sort of feature. When you go into the north end of the corridor on the north side of Ruby Creek, it's the same section from curb to curb, but instead of a 12-foot sidewalk, we go with a continuous landscape strip just to make it a little bit greener, a little bit softer. And then you notice the buildings are set back further from the sidewalk because they're not meant to be, they can come out to the street, but they're really envisioned to be set back further. We think that's what the developers are likely to do. And then where we cross Ruby Creek, the road really narrows down because, number one, there's no need for a turn lane there because it's across the creek. And because there's a culvert here and that culvert has to be replaced as a fish barrier, we need to make that culvert as short as possible just for habitat considerations. And so we go with a 6-foot sidewalk, no landscaping, and the bike lane does go through that area, but that really narrows down how much width is needed for that culvert. We actually have also submitted a grant application to actually go ahead and replace that culvert. And so this is just a drawing showing the replacement of the culvert. We threw that in as a graphic in the plan. We are encouraging in the written goals the use of low impact development in the landscape strips, and that's a way to allow stormwater to actually flow into a vegetated area that's nicely landscaped. And that way you have water quality treatment and infiltration, and if needed, it can overflow and convey downstream to a pond or a stormwater outfall. But this is something that we're already required to encourage throughout the city, but we're trying to be really explicit by providing the graphic here. So in terms of numbers, the area today has 464 residents and 371 jobs. When we analyzed all those property groups A through M or P, I can't remember how many letters were assigned on that map, we found that without the park and ride, we could reasonably accommodate an additional 1,352 residents for a total of 1,816 residents. And we can accommodate an additional 281 jobs, bringing the total to 652 total jobs within the center. And that's important because one of the things that we're trying to achieve with planning this center is the Puget Sound Regional Council controls some of the federal transportation funding that comes to cities. And they're really encouraging us to make wise investments in terms of our limited transportation dollars to get the maximum yield in terms of housing and achieving the region's overall goals. And so to be an eligible center to get sort of priority for transportation funding, they really want you to have a balance of jobs and housing, and in housing or jobs can't exceed 80% within any center. And so this is showing that housing under the proposal would be 73% of the total. And of course, the employment would be 27%. So again, you know, the total center, actually, I think this number is wrong. I think the total center is 165 acres. And of that, once you take away all the wetlands, the buffers, the floodplains, the existing road right of way, we've only got 65 out of that 160 that are developable. And so, so you're accommodating, you know, a little under 2,000 people and 650 jobs on 65 acres, which is a pretty efficient use of land. So that is the presentation that we made for you today. And I'm going to turn the presentation off. Well, I'll take some questions first, and then I'll move into the actual document, the written goals and policies, and see if you have any questions or comments on that.
Yeah, one of the photos on there, or one of your slides had, the overview had, it looked like quite a bit of walking path out into the wetland. Is some of that must not be floodplain, or is it going to be built up? Or did I see that
I
wrong?
think the idea is that we wanted to have an upland area that could have active recreation, and we wanted to provide public access so that there's educational and interpretive opportunities with regard to the habitat. I think to encourage good stewardship of the two streams in the area, people have to know that it's there and they have to care about it. And so you do have to do, can be challenging to build trails within critical area buffers. It's not impossible. And until we actually get out and do a full-scale wetland analysis, we don't know the extent of the wetlands, the exact location. So this is purely conceptual right now. We would like to put in an extra pedestrian bridge to create a loop where you can cross over the creek in a more wooded setting, and then potentially loop back once you're back on Sydney to come across the road. And we did a similar bridge at McCormick Village Park, and we removed a culvert. That was our mitigation that we had to perform in order to have that permitted within the wetland buffer. And so with this floodplain here, I'm actually going to stop. I'm going to share a Google map right now. Bear with me for a second. So this is, are you guys seeing my map now?
Yes.
Yeah.
So when you look at the center today, you can see that this whole area is a big field, and I think they grow hay or something here. And you can actually see the dampness of the soil here where it's sort of saturated. And that's, you know, that's roughly where these wet areas are located. And so considering that this is probably forested at one point in time, restoring a lot of the floodplain and making it more of a forested type of wetland and floodplain area would probably mitigate all of the impacts associated with building some low impact walking trails through those areas. So I think there's a lot of opportunity to do restoration in areas that are generally unbuildable, and that will pave the way for us to provide recreational access in that area.
Yeah, I like the overview. I like the look of it for the recreation. And that Ruby Creek culvert, is that in need of replacement already, or it would just need to be as this moves forward?
It's complicated. I don't think the culvert is failing, though someday it will need to be replaced. It is identified as a partial barrier to fish, and Ruby Creek is a critical habitat for a handful of species that are listed as threatened. The other issue is that there's going to need to be a second sewer force main going up Ruby Creek, And so there's some utility work that needs to be done. And anytime you do utility work in the vicinity of a culvert, you have to replace the culvert. And so our goal here, if we can get that culvert replaced now, we would go ahead and we would dry plumb all of the facilities that we need. So we'd put in the 10-inch force main and cap it for now until we need it later. We would put in conduit for underground power. We would do all of those things at the time we replace the culvert, and we would actually build the road over the culvert to our planned standard rather than to the existing standard. And so it's not failing, but it is needed if for no other reason that we're going to have to replace it anyway when we put in future infrastructure.
Hey, Nick,
Yes.
in that case, in regards to that culvert, wouldn't it make a little sense to take a look about a little wider culvert there in case you wanted to extend that center turn lane farther north as
Well,
needed?
the center turn lane is going to resume on the other side of the bridge, so it's just going to taper down where it crosses. But there's really no need for a center turn lane in that area. And when you impact a buffer, which we're going to be impacting a buffer, you have to mitigate those impacts. And so if it's a longer culvert, there's going to have to be more mitigation that we have to come up with just to do the culvert project before we even talk about doing trails and other things. So it's more cost.
Sure, but in the future, you don't see the growth potential as creating that culvert to be a choke point?
No, not at all. I mean, it's the whole road corridor is 2 lanes north-south, and in our traffic model, we show that 2 lanes north-south is all that is needed for this corridor, essentially at full, and unless we go to really high densities, and I'm talking, downtown Seattle type densities, there's no need to look at putting in a wider corridor today.
Okay, thanks.
All right. I'm just going to pull up the actual planning document. We did today. We created a cover sheet and an acknowledgments page. I've got too many windows open on my computer. I apologize. It takes me so long to find everything. Well, maybe I don't have that open right now. Well, so actually, instead of pulling up the planning document right now, the other thing I wanted to talk about was, in order to implement the Ruby Creek plan, we're also going to have to adopt some regulations. And while I don't envision a whole lot of regulations, because we're mostly just applying our existing zones in a new way to implement the plan, there's a handful of things I want to bring to your attention. So in addition to the plan that will come forward in August, we plan to bring the zoning map amendment forward to actually amend the zoning map, which is a regulation, not a plan. So that would be a separate action. And in that ordinance, we will also include some development regulations. We're proposing a Ruby Creek overlay district. And you can see we've just created a map that just shows the boundary of the Ruby Creek area. We've said the purpose is to implement the goals and policies of the sub-area plan as adopted in the city's comprehensive plan. And we've said the standards of the overlay district apply to all land within the boundary as shown on the map. And what we're doing is we're saying we're relying on the city's existing development regulations framework, except as specified in the following sections. And we're basically creating a handful of exceptions to our existing rules that are specific to this area. And one of those exceptions has to do with the uses that are allowed. And specifically the transit park and ride. Currently a transit park and ride is allowed in some zones and not in others. And so we're being very specific here that it is not allowed in the downtown mixed use zone. You see that is a 2 dashes. That means not permitted. So that means that Kitsap Transit couldn't build that out to the street, but they could do it on the commercial mixed use sites. Likewise, in our zoning code, like a diamond parking lot, the one where you put the money in the slot or pay for parking at the Seahawks game, we don't want for-profit parking lots anywhere in the center, whereas in some of our zones we do allow it. So that's another change that we've made that's specific to this zone. Likewise, a commercial parking garage that's a standalone, this would be the same as the diamond parking lot, just a structure. We've said no to that. And then the other thing, in the rest of the city, the commercial mixed use zone does not allow for the construction of like a microbrewery. And seeing as how this is dear to my heart, I've proposed that we do allow, if somebody wanted to do a microbrewery in the commercial mixed use within this neighborhood, I think it's something that would probably make people want to live in the neighborhood and be an amenity. And I thought that was one item we could throw in to encourage. Likewise, drive-through facilities, so restaurants that would have a drive-through, we're allowing them in the commercial corridor and commercial heavy only. Currently, you can do them in the commercial mixed use, but because this neighborhood is really trying to be more walkable, we wanted to remove drive-throughs as one of the options. And that was actually something that we specifically discussed in our public survey, though our responses were not conclusive with regard to drive-through windows. Finally, low impact outdoor storage. When you go to Lowe's or Ace and they have the outdoor garden area, that's not like storing piles of PVC pipe or other construction materials, but it is outdoor storage that's an accessory use to a building. It's more permissible in other areas of the city to store things outside of your business, but here, because we're trying to make things walkable and comfortable for people who would be on foot, we really didn't want to have a whole lot of outdoor storage except in the commercial heavy zone within the center. Finally, building heights. These zones all have building heights that vary, and specifically downtown, the heights are set by the downtown overlay district. We were just going to cap things at 5 stories here, except when you get a height bonus through the transfer of development right program. That this is already in the transfer of development right area, but we wanted to make uniform heights allowed in the area. I imagine that everything is going to be 3 stories, but we do allow up to 5 stories, and I think for those mixed use buildings in the neighborhood core, that's where we would really want to see something like that. Finally, when we created our zoning code a year and a half ago, one of the provisions we created was a self-storage overlay district, and storage unit buildings. I don't know if all of you were here when we adopted that, but they're really lucrative for somebody who builds them, but they are not lucrative to the city who collects property tax on a pretty cheap metal building and doesn't, and the property consumes, or the use consumes sales tax generating commercial property. So we created an overlay district really to kind of push those things out of our centers and find little areas here and there where we could allow them. And there were a few properties in the Ruby Creek Center that allow storage units, and we would like to change that so that we don't have storage uses develop within this area that we're trying to envision is much more livable and walkable. So storage units are out within the center. And then finally, the graphic that shows the storefront street, that has to be actually put into the zoning code, because that's part of those graphics are part of our zoning code currently in the design standards. So that's really the extent of the regulations we're going to adopt. Everything else is implemented through the proposed zoning map that you saw in the presentation. So with that said, did anyone in reading the 25 or so page plan, did you have any observations about how goals and policies were written, or any other content that concerns you?
You did have it was mentioned a couple of different times, but the first one that I noticed was in the actual staff report page. I don't know if you can see it, agenda item 4A, this one here. You talk about the size of the parcel, and I believe this, that was the ADU one, I'm sorry. But you had 165.45 listed in one point and 166.45 acres listed in another point. Where's that acre that we've been missing?
Probably a typo. I believe it's 166, but let me pull up the actual plan right now. And I'm going to share the, I found our planning document here. So like I said, we made a nice cover for the plan. Let's see here. I'm trying to adjust the it's zoomed in a lot, but so we made an acknowledgements page. Does everybody's name look right? That's,
There's another E in Stephanie Bailey.
oops, there we go. Okay, not hearing any. So there's the format of this plan generally follows our comp plan. There's a land use section, a housing section, parks, transportation, natural systems, utilities, and all of the graphics you saw in the presentation are in the plan in order that they were numbered on that presentation. And with each section, you're going to see, I'm going to scroll down to the land use element here. You'll see each section is followed by a list of goals and policies. Almost there. So we have goals, and then the goal is really the overarching idea, and the policy is really how are you going to implement this goal. And so, you know, most of these goals are pretty benign, and it's really just writing goals to support sort of the visual plan that we've come up with. It describes, you know, how we're trying to create this Main Street feel, and how we want to encourage buildings to be out to the street in some areas and set back in other. But any concerns at all about the text here?
I thought it read pretty smooth myself.
Right. Well, if you see any typos between now and August, please feel free to point them out to us and we'll get them cleaned up. But I think this is pretty close to its final form. We're going to be putting it on the website here in the next couple of days. And we'll be sending out, like I said, postcards letting people know that they can view the plan and provide us written comment or show up to the public hearing and provide oral testimony in our Zoom meeting.
Hey, Nick.
Yeah.
One other one that I noticed was chapter 2 vision and preferred alternative, 2.2 preferred alternatives. It talks about the park and ride concept is shown in figure 4. I think you're showing it in figure 3 instead of figure 4.
You are correct. I must have rearranged something after I had typed the text. Carrie, can you make a note of that? Thank you. I was going to go back to the table real quick that shows these population numbers. We sort of got at this in the presentation, but here it is. So as I mentioned, that one of those maps had letters for each ownership grouping, and what we've done here is we've given you the total acreage, and then in GIS using estimates of what wetland constraints exist. And also in some of these properties, we've been talking to developers because they're actively trying to make a project happen. And so like parcel A, I mentioned they're coming in, it looks like with a 235 unit apartment complex. So we know something about that site. And in those cases, we've used the actual number. In other cases, the first black and white drawing that I showed you indicated the consultant actually said this is a 15 unit apartment building, and they gave us approximate counts based on actual scale. And so we're using the consultant provided information based on their layout. It's possible that a developer could find a more creative way to do something, or maybe would do a taller building than what we're assuming. So the projected housing units, it mostly assumes a 3-story average. And our most recent OFM, Office of Financial Management numbers say that we have about 2.09 persons per household in multifamily construction in Port Orchard. This is actually a little bit higher than the region. And so if somebody comes in and builds a new project, I don't know for sure that we would hit these numbers, but that's the best data that we have right now. So you'll see for each of these properties, some of them we assume no population growth because that property is likely going to be a commercial development, and others have a considerable population number. And we have a similar, this is the jobs estimate, where we are we tabulate the total acreage, the expected square footage of commercial space, and we are assuming one job per 300 square feet, which is very typical of retail restaurant type development. If you have more of a professional office setting, you're more like one job per 500 square feet. So we're projecting employment based on assuming that this is mostly going to be retail, but if some other user came in, then the numbers could be different, or it's possible they could build a taller building and have more square footage than what we're assuming here. And about parks, we're currently updating our parks plan, and so we've identified the goal to create a park in this neighborhood, but we're going to leave it to the parks plan to sort of figure out what that park's going to consist of, what sorts of facilities will exist. We mostly want a place for people to gather, and we know that there are natural amenities we want to take advantage of, but beyond that, in terms of kids' toys or splash pads or all the other possible features you could have in a park, we'll figure that out in the parks plan. There are most of the projects that you see in the plan are restated from other documents. And so we're pretty explicit where we say this is a list as of the writing of the plan that identifies the projects we know are needed. This may change as we refine our utility system plans. These are the restoration projects. We've applied for the culvert replacement, floodplain restoration, and then WashDOT's actually going to be replacing the culvert under SR 16 for Blackjack Creek, and that's in design right now. So you'll be seeing SR 16 ripped up in the coming years, probably 3 years from now. And that'll be similar to what they did in Gorst a couple of years ago. And then as for water and sewer projects, some of the projects are in other parts of the city, but they're needed because they increase water supply or fire flow. Others are actually directly located in the center, like the Albertsons lift station. Then there's the North Ruby Creek lift station, the South Ruby Creek lift station. I mentioned a second sewer force main, and then undergrounding the Puget Sound Energy facilities. And then the road standards, of course, are in the plan. And our transportation projects are kept in the 6-year transportation improvement program. And you guys voted to recommend approval of that in June. And we haven't restated that here because it changes every year. So I think your eyes all look glazed over, and I've said enough. Any final questions or thoughts?
Is it possible for you guys to send us a hard copy of this?
Absolutely.
Okay, thank you.
You want one, Annette? Anybody else?
No, I'll be happy with a digital copy if it's just make sure it's the most recent with the current changes.
Yeah, we'll send one with the cover page and the acknowledgements page tomorrow.
That'd be
Is it
great.
going to be in a PDF or a Word file?
It'll be a PDF. We can send the Word version if you prefer.
Yes, because then if I write edits, I can put in comments and it's easier for you to review what I see.
Okay, they won't have the cover page because the cover is a PDF, but we can send you the Word portion.
Terrific.
All right. Is there anything else on the agenda, Annette?
Nope, that's it. Sorry I was late, you guys. Thanks for
All
waiting.
right. We're glad you made it.
All right. Well, everybody have a good evening.
Yeah, you too. Talk to you later. Bye-bye.
Thanks.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
More breweries and less storage units. I like it.
Words to live by.